Hello, church, and happy Memorial Day to you. As this day we remember all the men and women who have lived and served in the armed forces in this nation, who have laid down their lives in service to the country they loved and to you and I. It's very different from most Memorial Days. The parades, many of them are not happening, most of them. Every Memorial Day, I usually run a race in Beverly. It's full of men and women that are in the fire and police departments, because that's where a lot of the city of Chicago PD and fire department live. And inevitably, there's always a soldier in full gear carrying a flag, all 6.2 miles of that 10K race, full fatigues, army boots. And when they play that national anthem, and you're standing shoulder to shoulder with all those folks, remembering the fallen on a beautiful Memorial Day, the sunshine and the freedom of the air, to be able to go out on a race, to be able to go to church and worship without fear of somebody coming and arresting you. And you just take a moment to think of all, we're so insulated from the cost that all these men and women laid down. But I remember two stories. The first was when I was serving in Michigan most recently, and a man who had served in Vietnam. He lived in Portage, and as he was nearing the end of his life, we sat down on his porch, and he said, I was part of a company in basic training. We were in California getting ready to ship off to Vietnam. I got violently ill. My company left, and they told me and this other guy to stay behind. We just were not fit enough to travel with the company. And he said, mine was put in this meat grinder and was surprised during the Tet Offensive. And when I finally got to Vietnam about a month and a half later, out of the 112 guys in my battalion, 110 of them were dead. Just me and this other guy who had been too sick to go. These guys I'd trained with for weeks on end, gotten to know, played cards with, gone out and leave. And he said, so many times I wonder, why not me, God? Why? And he had this terrible guilt that he was a survivor. And not only that he had survived, but he wasn't in the fighting when his brothers were being killed. And he said, I wrestle with that every day of my life. Thinking about all the sorties I flew, all the time I had been there in Vietnam, and how these guys, if it had just been a month earlier, if I hadn't gotten sick, that I would have died with them. And there's a part of him who wished, I think only if you serve could you understand, there's a part of him who wished he had perished with his combat unit, his company. But the second memory came right at the end of 9/11. Our church had gathered in response to this terror attack, planes that had been hijacked, and the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, and the one that had been downed by the passengers in Pennsylvania, their heroics. And as we were talking about Christian response, and the country was talking about going to war, retaliation, hunting down these bands of terrorists, and there was those kind of crusaders in our circle that were saying, yes, they need to pay. And then there was a few who were talking about, what if our response was more of turning the other cheek kind of thing, and so there was some debate around the circle, and this one man, Gene, who had served in Korea and has since died, will never forget it. He said, there was a moment when I was in Korea and we were charging into an enemy fortified position. And I was in a trench. And I fired a shot and missed this Korean soldier who was coming at me. And we got into hand-to-hand combat. Knives. And it was his life or mine, and I killed him with my hands. And he said, every time we take communion, I see his face. I sat there by his body and looked through his wallet and saw that he had a young wife and a young son. And I thought back home to the wife I just married and the young 3-year-old son by her knee as I went off to fight. And here I'm looking at a mirror image. And in that moment, the soldier in me left, and the husband and father in me wept. And I said, I've just made somebody a widow, and I've just taken away somebody's daddy. And so when I say, Jesus, forgive me at this table, I think, how can you, God? I tell myself I was doing my duty, but at the same time, I think, I've killed. I know there's a time for war, but I also know, love your enemies. And my brothers and sisters, as we celebrate a beautiful day, I want you to sit with Jean's memory of the cost of serving, the cost of fighting for your country and taking another's life. In the words of an Eastwood movie, The Unforgiven, it's a horrible thing, a terrible thing, killing a man. You take everything he's got and everything he's going to have, and you live with that memory. The price and cost that these soldiers carry is more than we can imagine who are not combatants. And so, for those who have fallen this day, may we out loud or give a quiet word of thank you, God, for we've asked these men and women to do. And perhaps as a response to their memories, we might think of how we can take better care of those men and women who are coming home. The VA hospitals that are not as good as they should be. The veteran pay that is not as good as it should be. And the care for the psychological and PTSD and depression rates of our soldiers as they try to find a way to fit back into, how do you fit back into normal when you've seen and done some of the things you've done for God and country? Perhaps more than our thanks are needed. May we remember this Memorial Day. Amen.